got those shares up 3.5% as we head into the afternoon. After a bit of a soggy opening, of course, you had provided guidance on those numbers to the markets a while back.
Yes, we did. But we also did an investor survey before the results came out and looking for some feedback on what they were looking for. I think one of the issues that was raised by our investors is that whilst we at PPC have been beavering away, cutting costs, we haven't, in many cases, highlighted what some of the work we've been doing. So there was a request that we highlight some of the cost-cutting exercises. We were actually able to report some very solid cost-cutting initiatives, and I think that's helped sentiment in the market.
Well, I mean, just looking through the numbers, I mean, you talk about some of the input costs that are going up, and of course we've seen that petrol price rising, we've seen electricity tariffs rising. What sort of cost cutting are we looking at here? Because you also have overhead costs, I'm sure, which must be weighing on the group.
Yeah, we in fact have addressed our overhead costs. One of the things we did in this economic climate across the group is a moratorium on new employment. So as people leave the company, we in fact bring the headcount down. In our head office, we've embarked on a voluntary separation package exercise, which was taken up by quite a number of people. So our head office numbers have reduced by 16%. And if we work through some of the savings that we have, we've also cut back on consultancies, on fixed-term contractors, other savings. We're projecting savings of 65 million for our head office costs going forward. And there's still work going on in that regard.
How quickly do those costs creep back in, though, when we see the economic recovery and the recovery and demand for cement? I mean, will you be able to maintain a lean, mean cost base, or do you think you'll see lots of those costs creeping back into the system?
Well, typically, our view is that our head office costs should be somewhere between 6 and 7% of our revenue. We've gone up, as our revenue has gone down, head office costs are now 9% of revenue. So we see ourselves bringing it back. The company has had a lot to do with over the last number of years. We're unbundled out of Barloworld. We had to list ourselves on the JSE and deal with that. There was a large black economic empowerment transaction. All of those get typically done at head office. So a lot of activity, but the activity is scaling down, and we believe we can get those costs back into the 6 to 7% range.
Talk to us about demand, because I mean that has been a big factor affecting you. Very low sales demand, so it affects your revenue, but also affects your margins because you have to be a lot more competitive in that market. Are you seeing any turnaround in that? You do say in the commentary that the slowdown in demand is slowing, but it hasn't actually turned the corner yet, has it?
Well, on a month-to-month basis, it has. So where we are now, we're slightly down on a year-to-year basis, 3 or 4% down. On a monthly basis, we're starting to go 1 or 2% up. So if you sort of do a projection forward, there will be a stage, probably late this year, if the current trend continues, where we get to a stage where we, on a year-to-year basis, back to zero again. So what we're saying to the market is our best guess, and it's very difficult to be a forecaster in today's world, but our best guess is that at the end of the year, we'll end up with a number that's similar to what we had last year.
Where are you seeing that demand coming in from at the moment, Paul?
There's no one big project. There is a dearth of large projects out there. But what we're seeing, it's more the second-tier contractors. Many of them are reporting that they have more work. They've been tendering on lots of work. Some of the tenders are coming through. So at the moment, we're not seeing it in the large construction sector, more in the second tier. There are a couple of road projects coming through, which are quite nice. Not huge N2 freeway. That one in the Cape is still pending. But some of the smaller secondary roads are coming through. So, yeah, I would say second-tier activity at the moment.
And do you think this is a precursor to some of those big contracts and some of this government spending we've been talking about for the last 2 years?
Yeah, the one tends to follow the other. I think, you start with the smaller contracts. They're easier to get done, easier to get the tender process done. So hopefully it's a precursor to bigger things, yes.
It's also a regional problem as well, because you do mention in the commentary that the Western and Eastern Capes are worse affected than some of the inland regions. And you're actually seeing growing demand in some rural areas. Steady demand in Botswana and Zimbabwe looking pretty good.
Yeah, if you look across South Africa, north to south, in the northern provinces, Northwest, Limpopo and Mpumalanga, we actually see growth. In Gauteng, the centre region, we see the construction industry down, but the rest more or less has levelled off. And in the Western and Eastern Cape, it's still very, very depressed. And if you look over the last 3 years, we had a peak 2007, 2008. The country on average is down 25% from where it was at that time, but the Western Cape is down 50%. So the Western Cape has basically gone down at twice the rate of everything else.
Why do you think that is? Any reason for that?
We've got speculation, so I can give you our view. And the view we have is that the Western Cape was very residential, light commercial, and that was the first sector, that was the sector hardest hit when the economic crisis hit. So there was a huge cutback in residential activity, golf estates, shopping centres, that sort of thing, and that has taken a big knock, and it's still not where it should be.
Is that the sector then you would expect to perhaps come out of the downturn quickest?
No, we actually, as we're seeing at the moment, the residential seems to have plateaued. In rural areas, it's always been quite strong. So we see rural activity, residential, and the second tier construction activity, probably the two things in the next 6 months that are going to drive demand.
I mean, during a downturn like this, do you continue to invest in capacity and upgrades and refurbishments of factories, or does that really all grind to a halt?
No, cement is a long-term game. So the difficulty we have, you have to manage the short term whilst you think about the long term. So we actually have to do both.
So those factories in the Cape, you are still investing in those and upgrading those?
Yeah, those factories are 50 years old. They've run very well for 50 years, but they are energy intensive. So produce good cement, but their energy consumption is very high. So what we're doing now is upgrading those plants so that we use less energy producing the cement.
So it becomes more efficient at the same time.
And if you look at the project that we've announced, that only is completed in 4 years' time. So in fact, we're spending now for what happens in 4 years' time.
Okay, we're out of time. Just very quickly, would you care to hazard a prediction for the second half?
Traditionally, second half been better than the first, and we hope to keep it that way.